We have been taught lies. Reality is not at all what we perceive it to be. We cannot survive any longer by hanging on to the falsehoods of the past. Reality must be discerned at all costs if we are to be a part of the future. Truth must prevail in all instances, no matter who it hurts or helps.
What did Ben Franklin say when he came out of the Constitutional Convention after everything was signed, sealed, and delivered? Somebody said, "Hey, Ben, what have ye wrought? A republic, if you can keep it." He knew. They all knew. What was it really about? Why did they give it to us if they knew we would give it up? And they did know. Make no mistake about that. They knew. What do you think the fight over federalism was all about? They wanted to make sure that at some future point, the great central government would seize control.
They also built into the Constitution two things that would ensure our downfall should we prove unworthy of ruling ourselves. And it was the great experiment. Can man rule himself, or must he have a king? And those two things they built into the Constitution was the creation of a foreign country within this country called the federal government residing in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., who has citizens only under the 14th Amendment and have no constitutional rights. And the other one is the right to contract. With the right to contract, they dangle bait from the Federal District of Columbia, such as Social Security, which says, since you're irresponsible and can't save $110 every month and invest it in any kind of an interest-bearing investment, we will take that money from you if you choose to participate in this program, and we will keep it in a trust account, and when you grow old, we will give you money that will take care of you in your old age, so you will not be a burden on society. The public fell for this, because in their hearts they knew that if they took $110 every month and saved it in any kind of an interest-bearing account, even the lowest, by the time they retired, they'd be so wealthy it'd be beyond their wildest dreams. But they knew they wouldn't do it. They knew they'd spend the money. So they joined the Social Security program. And now they can't even buy dog food with what they get. But even more important, by contracting with that federal government to receive that benefit, they then became 14th Amendment citizens of the Federal District of Columbia and gave up their constitutional rights. That's the downfall. Anytime you accept something from Daddy, you have to give something in return. How many of you ever went home after you had left home and come of age and left home? How many of you have done that? Quite a few. What happened when you went home? If Daddy said be in by midnight, you had to be in by midnight, didn't you? Even though you were 26 or 28 or 30 or however old you were. If Daddy said, listen, your mother fixes dinner at 6 o'clock, you better be sitting at this table at 6 o'clock, or you can go find someplace else to live, then you better be sitting at the table at 6 o'clock, right? This is called socialism, folks. Free people have to be responsible for themselves. And freedom requires work and risk, effort, and sometimes you're playing with the odds. And each man gets according to what they build themselves. If they can build an empire, they're entitled to it. If they can't, they're not. Socialism is this: I can't take care of myself. I can't handle this freedom. I'm irresponsible and there is no God, so I know I'm going to die and somebody must protect me. Somebody's got to feed me and guarantee me a job. And if I get sick, they got to take care of me. Most people spend the first 21 years of their life trying to become an adult. Once they get to that age and become an adult and become responsible legally and morally, they look around at the world and they see how tough it is, and they spend the rest of their life trying to climb back into the womb. Trying to find somebody or something that will protect them from the world. And that is the downfall of this country. When you go home to Daddy, you have to give up your freedom. So and you ask the federal government for benefits, and you contract with them and give up your constitutional rights and your state citizenship to become a 14th Amendment citizen of the Federal District of Columbia, you have given up your freedom. And that's why they're able to do so many unconstitutional things and pass so many unconstitutional laws, is because there aren't any constitutional citizens left in the country. Yes, sir.
Are you talking about the difference between an equity citizen and a sovereign citizen?
That's absolutely correct. It requires a lot of work, but it can be done.
Given what most Americans believe, the next statement may be more shocking than any previous. The fact is, the United States is not a country, but a corporation contractually created by the Constitution. Your state is a country, per the law, and your original citizenship is of that country. Our founders instituted themselves to be first and foremost citizens of their respective states. As of 1787, those states already had formed a union, and they created the Constitution for the purpose of perfecting that union in forming a national government. They did not intend that the new nation have any jurisdiction or powers over the states or their citizens that were not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. They stated this point quite clearly in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. They granted the United States exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may become the seat of the government of the United States, our District of Columbia, and to exercise authority over all places purchased by the consent of the states. And that is all. The framers further secured the rights of the people with the 9th and 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights. In the 9th, they established that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And in the 10th, they made clear that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The only way the federal government can have any jurisdiction beyond these constitutional clauses is by written permission or contract. Which leads us to another piece of the puzzle, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1868 following the Civil War. As barbaric as it may sound today, the black slaves, prior to the conclusion of the Civil War, were legally considered to be property, with none of the rights or privileges of free-born people, only duties. The money interests took advantage of America's desire to free the slaves, and found a way to use the swiftly adopted post-war constitutional amendments to enslave all of the people. The deceit is in the wording of both the 13th and 14th Amendments. You will note that the 13th Amendment provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. But why the emphasis on involuntary servitude? Isn't it the same thing as slavery? Sure it is. But they had to mention the concept of involuntary servitude because they wished to retain another type of slavery, voluntary servitude. Voluntary servitude is an ancient and established concept. It was the way serfs became subjects to their lords during feudal times in England and other European countries. It was a way for free men to earn a living at a time when all property was held by a select few, and thus anyone who wanted to farm and support their family had first to agree to be subject to a lord of the land. Our forefathers hated this concept and designed our Constitution to exclude titles of nobility, making all Americans sovereign. The 14th Amendment turned the intention of the founders on its ear by making voluntary servitude a requirement for former slaves to gain the rights already guaranteed to free-born United States citizens. When the slaves were released from their involuntary servitude following the war, their status was changed from that of being property to that of being a person. But being a person still entitled them to none of the rights associated with citizenship. So the 14th Amendment ostensibly was written to provide the former slaves with the same constitutional rights of free-born American citizens, but only if they agreed first to become subject to the jurisdiction of the corporate United States. Making oneself paramountly, that is, first subject to the jurisdiction of the laws of the United States, however, limits access to parts of the Bill of Rights, as we'll explain in a moment. But first remember, anyone who voluntarily subjects himself to the laws or jurisdiction of another is, in every way, obligated to abide by the terms of any contracts or laws established by whomever establishes the rules of the contract. In simple terms, this meant that the former slaves became subjects first to the United States, and secondly to the state in which they lived. They had no sovereignty whatsoever. This status had never existed in the United States prior to that time. The 14th Amendment created a new class of citizenship in the United States, a second-class citizenship. Up until 1868, every American was a paramount citizen of their state, and by virtue of that, also a citizen of the United States, with full individual sovereignty as guaranteed by Amendments 9 and 10 in the Bill of Rights. But so-called naturalized citizens, or 14th Amendment citizens, are paramountly subject to all laws of the United States, and, having no status as freeborn citizens, have no access at all to the unenumerated rights retained for the people by Articles 9 and 10 of the Bill of Rights. That's because, in order to get any rights at all, they had to subject themselves to the jurisdiction of the corporate United States, which left them no unenumerated rights. The only rights they had were those specifically written into the Constitution. The sad tragedy of America today is that all U.S. citizens, regardless of race, are now 14th Amendment slaves due to contracts with the government of the United States through Social Security, birth certificates, driving licenses, citizenship statements, tax forms, and many other documents. The true paramount citizenship that all Americans deserve is that of their respective state, which is a sovereign citizenship. Such status would exempt them from federal and state income taxes, as well as property and inheritance taxes. This sovereign citizenship was the status held by our forefathers. Now, if you're still thinking that the U.S. government needs to have a central bank and collect income tax or it will collapse, think again. Over 2/3 of the federal government's income is derived from sources other than income tax. There is even evidence suggesting that none of your income tax is used by the government. Fees, excise taxes, tariffs, sales taxes, and other forms of income have easily supported the U.S. budget in the past and could easily support it now. We have done without a national bank for large stretches of our history, and the U.S. Treasury is perfectly capable of printing and managing a money supply. In fact, the only constitutionally sanctioned currency is backed by gold or other precious metals. This is a far more stable form of currency and is the type of money the Treasury was designed to handle. The government was doing so well collecting money under these original laws that it had amassed a huge surplus by the time this cartoon was penned 100 years later in 1887, when there still was no income tax collected at all. Up to this point, we have shown you how the money interests have 1. Established the Federal Reserve System, and 2. Exploited a second class of citizenship created by the 14th Amendment for other purposes. And we have mentioned a few names involved in the creation of the Fed. But there are other organizations working for our economic enslavement as well, along with other extremely rich and powerful international bankers. Those who support the Fed have created a global movement to centralize economic power in various puppet organizations that preach peace and stability through some variation of socialism, but act aggressively to draw nations into a web of foreign debt and servitude to their agenda. The United Nations, the World Monetary Fund, and the Council on Foreign Relations are all committed to an agenda of world domination through manipulation of economic power. The Council on Foreign Relations openly admits to being a private club, yet it is the primary recruiting post in both international banking and the federal government of the United States. Richard Nixon, Nelson Rockefeller, John Foster Dulles, Dean Rusk, Alger Hiss, Robert S. McNamara, and every president since FDR, with the exception of John Kennedy, have been members of this exclusive club where super financiers and your elected representatives can mix freely and plan the next step in the consolidation of power.
The new Constitution that was instated in the United States. So is the Constitution that we know today in effect, or is there a different Constitution that you claim?
Unfortunately, we are being snookered by the Congress because every 2 years they reintroduce a state of martial law. And we are not under our first Constitution. We are under this second secret Constitution. What that Constitution provides is that our tax dollars are going to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. They're not paying for any of the services that we need in our country. Instead, where are we getting the money? We're getting it from the poppy fields in Afghanistan and the drug trade. That's how we're financing our country. This is a travesty.
Now, you mentioned that this secret Constitution allows for the interest to be paid to the Federal Reserve. But isn't that the Federal Reserve Act that we know that was established in 1913 when it was passed on Christmas Eve? So where does that law fall into place?
You'll remember that President Lincoln was assassinated by a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. That was in order to prevent the greenback dollars that Lincoln had issued directly by the Treasury Department. And so what happened was the bank of that day was then able to continue to earn interest on the currency of the United States. That was why he was assassinated. And the reason why we had that second Constitution enacted in 1871 is that is when the Revolutionary War debts fell due. As a matter of fact, one day I opened my mail and somebody mailed me the financing statement for those debts that, together with the unpaid interest on the debts, had accrued to the trillions of dollars.
Now, the concept of a secret Constitution, some people might cry foul there. I don't believe a word you're saying because I've never heard of such a thing. How can those claims be substantiated?
Two ways. The first is that I will show you the minutes of the meeting of the patriots who met and looked at the State House records in Carolina when that secret Constitution was enacted. And I can show you the financing statements for the Revolutionary War debt. That was the reason we got that second secret Constitution.
So is that second secret Constitution, who is it in favor of? Is it in favor of the people or the corporate United States?
It's in favor of the banks. It's certainly not in favor of the people. What happens when you have a child is your child is given a Social Security number. They estimate how many taxes your child is going to pay over his or her lifetime. And they take that birth certificate and they issue it on the capital markets and they earn money on it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the birth certificate itself creates a monetary value on the books with the Federal Reserve?
I'm saying something much worse, actually. What I'm saying is that when every citizen goes into the court system, they are not seen there as themselves a U.S. citizen. They're seen as the person who had their birth certificate pledged. You're there as a debtor. You're not there as a citizen.
So, because of the national debt, are you saying that Americans they're just born into debt and there's nothing that they can really do about it? They're debtors in this system.
We have been converted from human beings that are citizens of the Republic of the United States into chattel. Chattel, that is a legal term for something which is property. We are now considered to be property of the Federal Reserve. We're not considered to be human beings and citizens of the United States.
That's a very strong statement. How do we reverse that? If that is in fact the true statement, how do we reverse that?
The first thing we do is we recognize it. We understand it. And then the second thing we do is we have that constitutional convention, which is our right under our first constitution, and we repeal that banker's constitution. We repeal it, we get rid of it, we do not want it, we do not need it, and we issue our treasury dollars backed by the gold out of the collateral account that has been offered to us. The Act of 1871, where Maryland and Virginia created this square mile of the District of Columbia, and then they incorporated the United States as a company, and they made the President of the United States the Chief Executive Officer, and they made the representatives of Congress managers. And so when people come to Congress, they're taught very quickly that their constituents are not what it's all about. What it's all about is for them to get on the dole of the federal government, which is there to enslave the people who live in the United States. That's what that is.
So is it fair to call it a constitution then, or is it more or less when Maryland and Virginia created Washington D.C. as its own district of Columbia as we know it today?
Well, it's more than that, because the federal courts, the judges, are not sitting there in courts of equity. They're secretly treating us as if we are property of the United States. When we come in there, we are not there in a court of equity. So yes, it is a different arrangement with our government.
This secret constitution, is it really more of a corporate document?
What it means is that when you go to court to protect your rights, you don't even get to first base, because that judge is not sitting in what you call a court of equity. They're not looking at you as if you're a citizen of the United States. They're handling you as if you're a person who's just servicing the debt of the United States. You're there as a thing. You need to do your homework as citizens and find out what it means when you have Federal Reserve notes. They're valueless and they are unconstitutional, and we need to get that outfit out of here.
Two years ago, from my research, I'm convinced it's much more serious than that. It's more than a loose-knit network. It is a conspiracy. In 1784, a copy of this document was sent to the illuminist Weishaupt and delegated to foment the French Revolution. Mean the Illuminati was responsible for the French Revolution? Yes, absolutely. The courier was struck dead by lightning as he rode through Ratisbon on his way from Frankfurt to Paris. What about a little divine intervention there, huh? The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned them over to the proper government authorities. After careful study of the plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raid Weishaupt's newly organized lodges of the Grand Orient and the homes of some of the most influential associates, including the castle of Baron Bassen-Sonderdorf. Additional evidence thus obtained convinced the authorities that documents were a genuine copy of a conspiracy by which the Synagogue of Satan had controlled the Illuminati at the top, planned to use wars and revolutions to bring about the establishment of one kind or another of a one-world government, the powers of which they intended to usurp as soon as it was established. In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lodges of the Grand Orient. In 1786, they published the details of the conspiracy. We'll start up here. In 1784, an act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the continuing Luciferian conspiracy. This explains the previous 9 pages, goes into it in detail. We don't have time to do it completely. Conspiracy. Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, defected from Christianity and embraced the Luciferian ideology while teaching at Ingolstadt University. In 1770, the money lenders who had recently organized the House of Rothschild retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols designed to give the synagogue of Satan ultimate world domination so they can impose the Luciferian ideology upon what remains of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weinsoff completed his task on May the 1st, 1776. It's a communist holiday, isn't it? May 1, 1776. The plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. In 1776, Weishaupt organized the Illuminati to put the plot into execution. The word Illuminati is derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light. Weishaupt's revised plan required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them accomplish their purpose. 1. Use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of people already occupying positions in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of human endeavor. Once an influential person had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail and threats of financial ruin, public exposure, and physical harm, and even death to themselves and their loved ones. Number 12, told those present that they must use their wealth to have candidates chosen to public office who would be obedient to their demands and would be used as pawns in the game by the men behind the scenes. The advisors will have been bred, reared, and trained from childhood to rule the affairs of the world. Number 13, control the press. Number 16, infiltrate into the secret Freemasonry to be used for their purposes. That's been documented many times. Number 17, expound the value of systematic deception, use high-sounding slogans and phrases, and advocate lavish promises to the masses, even though they cannot be kept.
I will not forget the wound to our country and those who inflicted it. I will not yield. I will not rest. I will not relent in waging this struggle for freedom and security for the American people. So I don't know where he is. Nor, I just don't spend that much time on it. We will not tire. We will not falter. And we will not fail. Terror is bigger than one person.
The truth becomes clearer when we simply look at our current banking system. According to a report entitled The Federal Reserve Directors, a study of corporate banking influence conducted by the Committee on Banking, Currency and Housing, House of Representatives in August 1976, it was concluded that all major financial banking cartels of the United States are all subsidiaries of the London Bank of England. In other words, the Neiman Rothschild Bank owns every major bank in the United States. This list includes Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley, recently dissolved from the created economic crisis, National City Bank, Chase Manhattan, and many others. Every time a taxpayer pays a tax, they are transferring their labor to the Queen of England and her heirs. Who are her heirs, you may be asking? All of your presidents and high office officials who are related to the aristocracy by blood. These officials are more commonly known as esquires. An esquire is defined as a man belonging to the higher order of English gentry, ranking immediately below a knight. To represent the crown, esquires or attorneys were used to handle the legal process of infiltrating the Americas. These esquires maintained positions of power, thus continuing control through British Admiralty law. Most of us have heard of Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and their early contributions to the United States, but what you may not have heard is that Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay were all esquires to the crown. They negotiated the Paris Peace Treaty of 1783 on behalf of the United States. It becomes clearer now why the treaty seems to align in favor of the British, even though they supposedly lost the war. The Paris Peace Treaty did not give America title to land. The king's possessions in America were protected and governed by corporate charters. Benjamin Franklin visited England and France many times during the Revolutionary War. Again, the British just moved from overt control of the 13 colonies to covert control. After the Civil War, the United States was financially weakened. Low on resources and still struggling to put the country back together, America needed money. The international bankers were right there to lend us all that we needed. In 1871, Congress cut a deal with the Rothschild bankers to incur a debt, which would allow the establishment of a new government controlled by foreign money interest. Under the Legislative Act of February 21, 1871, the United States government incorporated as a commercial enterprise to do business for profit. What that means is that the United States of America changed from a country into a corporation. What you must understand is that this changed the entire process of how our government works and its overall objective as an enterprise. This Legislative Act of 1871 designated the District of Columbia under a separate form of government with separate jurisdiction from the rest of the Union States. With the United States of America now incorporated as a commercial enterprise, the country could borrow huge sums of money from the international bankers. The debt would eventually get so high that by 1933, just 62 years later, the United States would have to file for Chapter 11. Because of the Legislative Act of February 21, 1871, Washington, D.C. is not a state, but a jurisdiction called the District of Columbia. The evidence for this fact can be found in the 41st Congress, Session 3, Chapter 62, 1871, when they state, an act to provide a government for the District of Columbia, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States and Congress assembled, that part of the territory of the United States included within the limits of the District of Columbia be, and the same is hereby created into a government by the name of the District of Columbia, by which name is hereby constituted a body corporate for municipal purposes, and may be contract and be contracted with, sue and be sued. In short, the 50 states are separate from the jurisdictional lands of the District of Columbia. This district is a corporation called the United States of America. Contrary to what you were taught in school, the United States is not a country. It is a corporation like IBM, General Motors, or Microsoft. This corporation has legal jurisdiction to do business and create franchises. Consider the other 50 states as franchises for the parent company of the United States of America. This is why we have a president and not a king or queen. Only kings or queens can rule countries. Legally, a president cannot rule over a country, but can make decisions on behalf of the king or queen. In the case of the United States, that is exactly what our president does. Countries don't have presidents. Corporations do. Whenever the president is being introduced, he or she may be referred to as the President of the United States. The United States of America is no different than General Motors of Detroit or Sears and Roebuck of Chicago. These descriptions are referring to companies which reside in a specific jurisdictional area. In Volume 20, Corpus Juris Secundum, 1785, it states, the United States government is a foreign corporation with respect to a state. Each of the 50 states is foreign to the other. This is why you can gamble in Las Vegas, Nevada, but not in Utah. This is also the reason why persons who commit crimes in one state and flee to another are extradited back to the state where the crime was committed. This is done because under law, the state where the crime was committed is the only state that has jurisdictional authority. Under business law, every corporation must have a president, a secretary of treasury, and so on. Our president is the President of the United States of America. He is not the President of America. This concept can be somewhat confusing, especially since America and the United States is constantly being sold to the public as existing in the same jurisdictional area on the map. The only connection the 50 states have to the United States Corporation is again either by contract and/or franchise agreement. A part of this franchise agreement is designated by the status of individuals who call themselves citizens. This contract between the United States of America and the 50 separate states is called an adhesion citizens contract. This adhesion citizens contract is known as the 14th Amendment, which was ratified on July 28, 1868. The second part of the franchise definition mentions that it allows an individual or group to carry out specific commercial activities. These activities fall into a category called interstate commerce. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution is known as the Commerce Clause. It states that Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the states and with the Indian tribes of the time. This power fell under a regulatory body called the Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC, in 1887. Each time you sign your name or pledge an oath, you are changing your status. You may be asking, what about American citizenship? In law, when you see the words American citizen, this denotes that you are a United States citizen contracted into with the birth certificate, social security number, or through your state franchise agreement, which is the adhesion contract of the 14th Amendment. It is critical that you understand that you are not and cannot be an American. An American is a free person who has not made a contractual agreement with the United States Corporation. Remember, you are not an American. You are legally a citizen living in a foreign state. This authorization granted by the corporation called the United States of America can be tied into three main areas of contract, which we have mentioned. This process has nothing to do with sovereignty. A citizen of the United States Corporation or American cannot be sovereign because they do not own the land or have clear title to land. Further, these persons have not established a military to take the land or to create their own land within the continental United States.